Welcome to another session of Truthseekers Institute, where our focus is on making the informational relational. We are in the business of ensuring that the truths that we learn about God through the scriptures, everything about him, that we just don't get caught up in mere information for information's sake or just in our heads. We want this information to translate to a powerful and palpable relationship with Jesus Christ himself and with one another. So we've been in the midst of this series as we are in year 10 of Truthseekers Institute, where we've been committed to Christian apologetics, theology, doctrine. This series in particular is really focusing and honing in on doctrine. Our core beliefs is this series, core beliefs. We want to be defining, understanding, and applying Christian doctrine and theology to an intimate relationship with God and his community. A core truth as a part of our core beliefs is that the scriptures, as we understand them, and the God of those scriptures is very much interested in you and I having intimacy with him. Intimacy with the Trinity, as we'll look at when we explore the doctrine of the Trinity, and also intimacy with the community that he has grafted and put together. Isn't this a beautiful truth about the heart and the nature of the God that you serve, the God that we're exploring? So this core belief series has been a challenge for us to really dig deep and ask ourselves, what do I believe deep down in me? Because our core beliefs are manifested in our thought processes. Our core beliefs are manifested in our actions, how we navigate the world, how we show up in community, how we think about purpose, destiny, identity. All these things are rooted in our core beliefs. So through this series, we've been talking about how these doctrines that we're talking about and how we're exploring them is rooted and anchored in the scripture. So go back in our earlier sessions where we spent some time talking about why we believe the Bible is true. What is the Bible? This compilation of spiritually charged historical documents that reveal truths about God, humanity, God's purposes and plans. And now we're going to get into some more doctrinal topics based on those scriptures. So the doctrine that we want to get into as we think about this, we're going to start talking about the doctrine of God, and we're going to spend some weeks and some sessions unpacking God. Because as Charles Spurgeon said, there's no greater study than the child of God, the elect of God, than to study God himself. There's no greater study that you can do, not the study of you or just your purpose and your identity, but the study of God himself. There's no loftier, more beautiful study than to spend your whole eternity studying God, learning God, knowing God intimately. This passage of scripture, the letter to Timothy from Paul, 2 Timothy 4, 3-4. The reason why this series is so important to us is because as he wrote to Timothy, it says, "For a time will come when people will not tolerate sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, they will multiply teachers for themselves because they have an itch to hear what they want to hear. They will turn away from hearing the truth and will turn aside to myths." So this series is about us destroying the roots and the foundations of mythologies. We want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. This is our mission and our aim. Why? Because truth is not factual only, but truth is a person. That person is Jesus. He's the truth. And he lets us know that the truth will set us free. And it's beautiful to know that you can be set free, but you first have to understand that detached from the truth, you're in bondage. Bondage to mythologies, bondage to lies, bondage to deception. But we don't want to be those people that are turning away from hearing the truth, because the truth is being proclaimed. Don't turn away to myths. So in our session this time, I would like to give you a title for this session, and this title is a question. Is anybody out there? Ever seen it in movies? I feel like they did it in some Disney movies or something like that. It's like, is anybody out there? Yelling, right? Hey, Titanic 2. Shout out James Cameron. But this moment where you and I ask the deep question when we look up to the sky or we look out into the universe, is anybody out there? Most of the time people do that. It's dark and they yell out, is anybody out there? But in this session, we want to talk about the existence of the God of the Bible, because before we unpack his nature and his characteristics, we want to give you just some starter tools, a starter pack for how to defend and believe about the nature of God's existence, his active presence in the world. It's going to continue to be very deeply enriching for us, but we want to start with this question, is anybody out there in the universe, in the world? When things happen, situations and circumstances, macro and micro, hit our lives, hit our societies and our worlds, what happens when you are challenged internally to ask the question, is God real? And a quote that we want to start with is one of my favorites from Paul E. Little. He says, belief doesn't create truth. Especially in Western society, where we are very hyper tolerant of all religions and worldviews for the most part. Christianity is the exception. That's where we experience hostility socially. However, in general, people don't care if you believe what you believe. Whatever's true for you is true for you, is the ideology, is the mindset. But he's revealing something very powerful here that the Bible, I believe, affirms and backs up. Just because you believe something, that doesn't mean that it's true. I went through a phase between the ages of 5 and 7 where I truly believed that I was Chinese. Very real for me. It's a very real experience. You can confirm this with my parents. I really believe I was Chinese, right? I said this, I have to be, because I was obsessed with Bruce Lee and I was just convinced that I was Chinese. But just because I believed it with my whole heart, my whole being, my whole mind, it didn't make it true. It doesn't mean it's true just because you believe something. But guess what? Here's another reality. Unbelief doesn't destroy truth. So if something's true, just because you don't believe it doesn't mean that it's not true. And he's saying here that Christian faith goes beyond reason. So it goes beyond our intellect, but it doesn't go against it. This is important for you and I who are believers in God to know that this is not a helpful crutch to get us through good times, or whatever helps you, whatever works for you. Don't believe anything if it's not true. You can believe something with all your heart and all your might, but it doesn't make it true. We know this on a foundational basic level, but this applies to weightier spiritual matters. So challenge yourselves throughout this conversation in this series to ask yourself, what do I believe? But do I believe what is true? Or am I trying to create something to be true just by believing it? When you believe something that's not true, you can be considered delusional, like I was. I was delusional to believe that I was Chinese. I was delusional after seeing Superman Returns, thinking that I could jump off the roof and I would fly. I was like, if I believe it enough, I could fly. I believe I can fly. It's not true, right? Don't arrest me. But you get the point. So as a Christian, don't throw your intellect or reason out the window. What we're going to talk about in this session is why it is practical, logical, and intellectually valuable to believe in God. That it's not a foolish thing to believe in God. The culture will have you thinking that it's superstition. That is just myths. But let's look at some realities. Hebrews 11:6, very powerful passage of Scripture. Read all the letters to the Hebrews. But this particular passage is so foundational, especially if you are someone who believes in God and you're in an intimate relationship. Relationships involve a desire to please the one with whom you are in relationship with. Can anybody identify with that? Some of us can't because we're selfish. We enter in relationships. You never even heard of this concept before. You're like, oh, relationships are not all about me. Oh, wow. It's just not for my own comfort or what I get out of it. But if your heart is softened and you've ever been in any real, deep relationship, you understand that there's a desire in you to please the other one. So if you're in a relationship with God like this, there are some key ingredients to pleasing God. And the scripture lets us know very clearly that if you want to please God, it says it is impossible to please God without what? Faith. You can't please God without faith. Doesn't that make sense though? Anyone who wants to come to him must believe that God exists. This is in the Bible. Why is this in the Bible? Because as we'll look at the doctrine of sin, sin made it possible for God's own creation to be so disconnected and so dysfunctional and so detached that it's possible for us to not even believe in the one that made us. This is the definition of insanity, foolishness. But look at this. It's not just that you have to believe that God exists, but look at this other part. And it says that he rewards those who sincerely seek him. Reward them with what? Him. God is the reward. God is the treasure. God is the prize. Relationships based on intentional pursuit. I'm in pursuit of you. I'm diligently seeking to please you. God, I believe in you. I have faith. How can you come to him unless you believe that he exists? Faith. As this passage in that section of Hebrews goes on. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Substance and evidence. There's evidence to believe that God is real and that he exists. We looked at the evidence for the scriptures. So ask yourself this question. Am I sincerely seeking him? This lets us know that there's an insincere pursuit. So even the people who reject God, oftentimes it's connected to an insincere pursuit. God, if you're real, then do this. Your pursuit is not genuine. It's not sincere. So be sincere in your pursuit. A question I want you to ponder on. Who is God? Who is God? Who is God? And don't make it too personal yet. I want you to think about this objectively. If someone asks you, you ask a child asks you, who is God? What would you say? Think about that. What would you say? Who is God? And throughout these next few sessions, I would like to use a resource that I encourage you to buy, but also it's an app you can get on your phone. It's called the New City Catechism. Really great resource. Basic doctrinal truths of the faith that we'll be using in future sessions as well. But this is what the New City Catechism says about God. And I added the last part. So they should put me on the team. Nah. Yeah, right. Facts. They left it. But I think it's helpful to think about the identity of God. Who is God? So before we talk about his existence, we want to be clear about who we're saying, because you can say God, but God means a lot of things right now, right? And in this segment of the series, we're going to talk about the names of God as he reveals them in Scripture, because God is specific about all his different expressions. We use God. It's a great English word. It kind of tells us. But God, you hear God so much. God, God, God. You could be talking about God, the universe. You can be talking about Allah. You can be talking about Krishna. You can be talking about even somebody who's really good at something. I'm a fashion god. You hear people say, oh, he's a god. Right? Lowercase, uppercase, it doesn't matter. But I like this definition. It says God is the creator. That's a very powerful identity. And in this space, we prioritize that definition first, that identifier first. Not because we want to, but because the scriptures, that's the first thing we learn. In the beginning, God created. The creator must be of ultimate importance, because then everything else falls into alignment. If you're a creator, you have certain entitlement to the rest of the thing. It's beautiful. We start off, oh, God is love. God is, yeah, but okay. But if I say, no, I'm the creator, then you have a certain, like, okay, now everything else you say, I fall in alignment with. This is why when you start with God as a creator, you have a lot less issues with everything else that he says. I've used this analogy before, but if I've built a house and I'm hosting a party, it's my rules. You're messing something up, I kick you out, you can't be mad. It's my house. It's my party. This is the whole thing. It's God's house, God's party. Don't touch this. Make sure you do that. This is the dress code, whatever it is, right? I'm saying, I'm throwing an all-white party. You come through in red because you want to be cute. You're getting kicked out. That's a good, nice shirt, though. But get out, because I set the tone. But he's not just creator. He didn't just make a thing. He's the sustainer of everyone and everything. He is eternal. Very important. He's infinite. So God has no beginning, but also he goes on forever. And he's unchangeable in his power and perfection. So he has power and he's perfect. He's good, his goodness. He's glorious. He's full of wisdom. He is wisdom. He's just and he's truth. And then I added this last part that's connected to his goodness, but also he is the full expression of love. And a creator, a good creator, loves. And because of his love, he's expressing his wisdom through that love. His justice is because of his love. The wrath of God, as we will talk about, because we're going to do a condensed version of the attributes of God in coming sessions, and we'll link to a series we did on the attributes of God back in the day now, where Gabe and myself took us to the attributes in more detail, so you can watch those more extensively, but we'll still recap them so that you know, because it's going to enrich your relationship with God. I think that one of the greatest issues that we have in contemporary Christian culture is that we don't study God enough. We always try to relate him to us, but I promise you, your heart opens up way more when you just adore him, because then it puts everything else into perspective. When I know that he's a creator and sustainer, already that gives me so much peace. Like, okay, he made all of this, so he knows what he's doing, but it's not just he made it and it's spiraling out of control. He also sustains everything. Okay, so he can sustain me. He sustains the trees. You start looking at everything different, like, wow, look at that. Look at that. Oh, God did this. He's sustaining this. This hasn't crumbled. How come the earth hasn't fallen? Oh, he put that in place. Wow, this is great. Just learn about him. So we're going to unpack these over time. Romans 1:20, our brother Gabe shared this in an earlier session. But as we step back to defend the existence of God and give you some tools around some arguments for the existence of God, we want to look at this. For since the creation of the world, Romans 1:20, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, these things you can't see, they're invisible qualities. And we're going to talk about the different qualities and attributes of God. But they have been clearly seen. Isn't that so beautiful how that's written? His invisible qualities have been clearly seen. How does something invisible be expressed as something that can be seen? Because that power and divine nature is in everything. Being understood from what has been made. Once again, God is the creator. You can understand his divine attributes and his qualities because of what has been made. So people, period, without an excuse. Back to that Hebrews passage, you can't please God without faith. You have to come to him and believe that he exists. How can I believe that you exist? Look at what I have made. You don't have an excuse not to believe. So even these arguments that I'm presenting to you, they get more sophisticated over time, but who cares? You don't have to memorize them. You don't have to know them. Creation, you and I included, are the greatest evidence of God's existence. The God of the Bible Because other gods, when you compare the descriptions, there's misalignment. But the God of the scriptures, as he's been revealed, is perfect alignment with creation and with humanity. We see it makes sense of everything. So I'm going to give you some arguments and walk you through them. So there are so many variations of these arguments. And like I said, you don't have to memorize them. You can come back to this video one day. And remember that these arguments don't necessarily win people to believe, but they've been very instrumental in many people coming into belief. Some of the greatest scientists of all time came to belief through these things. And if it does nothing else, let it give you just assurance that you don't turn off your brain when you come in here. This is a very intellectual experience. God gave us a mind. He wants it to be sound and to be used wisely. It's foolish not to be logical about this. Don't let anyone ever tell you that it's not spiritual to be logical. It goes beyond reason, but it's not completely out of reason. You think about even things that God said and has done. They're very supernatural things, but there's practical, logical reasoning. Abraham, leave your family. It's a spiritual thing. It was also practical. You study the history, you understand that his family, his father, the idolatry that was in that community, that culture, he was not logically going to be able to fully do what God said being there. You have to leave. Very spiritual, but it's like, oh yes, this makes sense. Okay, so the cosmological argument. This suggests that because the universe exists, we believe the universe exists. Some people believe the universe exists so much that they believe the universe is working out all things for their favor. But it also believes that everything that exists must have a cause. Then there must be a first cause, which is identified as God. These arguments go into much more sophisticated logic, but I'm just giving you the bare bones so that you can do your own research, use what's helpful to you. But this is saying that the universe exists, and scientifically it's been shown and proven that the universe is not eternal, that the universe had a beginning. Some people refer to it as the Big Bang. Even people who are atheists, they say it's the Big Bang. I agree with them that there was a Big Bang. The origin, though, you have to ask yourself the question, did this Big Bang randomly happen just because? Or was it caused to happen by a first effect? God. In the beginning, God spoke. And I want you to think about this, even if you're familiar with the passage of Scripture, thinking about in the beginning, God created. And we know a lot of how God created. What did he do? He spoke. What does God's voice sound like to create the cosmos? It's a powerful voice. You don't think that there was a bang? Let there be light. Light had never existed before. Boom! It comes into it. Yeah, it's a big bang. But the first cause, the cosmological argument, says that that first cause was God. Then we have the teleological argument. It proposes that the apparent design and purpose in the natural world, this is back to the Romans passage. The natural world, there's design and intention. Two lions get together, they make another lion. The sun shines on the leaves and the plants. Shout out to my biology teacher who failed me and I had to take it twice. Like photosynthesis, right? I took it in 9th and 10th grade. That's crazy, right? Chemistry. We see all these things, but there's not just design and purpose, but there's complexity and order. Wouldn't you all agree that the natural world is very complex? How does that? You can't really explain it. It's very complicated. But there's also an order to it. Who told the birds to gather together and to migrate when certain weather, who told them that? Or how did they do that? I don't understand it. There must be design and order. So as humans, we know that wherever there's complexity, there's information, there's design and purpose, there has to be a designer, right? So you identify this designer as God is an argument. It argues that because complex systems like human eyes or universe appear to have been designed for specific purposes, there must be an intelligent cause behind their creation. In the beginning, God created. God's brilliant. God's a great thinker. He's immaculate in his thought processes. He designed all of this. He put all these things together. Mathematicians, scholars over time This is why they come to belief in God, because they're like, whoa, this is a mastermind. So don't get caught in the trap of thinking that God, being the spiritual being, that he's not a brilliant mind. So when you study medicine, you study the body, you study the universe, you reach a point where you're like, and then if you flat out deny it, there's something else darker going on in your heart. Anthropological argument. This one, right? Anthropology, you think about the study of humans, suggests that the inherent human need for an experience of God, including our moral sense, internal, right, and our search for meaning, this is natural for all of us, points to a divine source. It argues that these aspects of humanity are unique to humans and suggest a connection to a higher power. Right? We're not talking about Jesus. We're not talking about the God of the Bible yet. This is just, hey, humans naturally crave meaning, desire, purpose. They're being drawn, like, what am I here for? Our internal moral sense. Your parents, even the best parents, they don't teach you all morals. The first conversation you usually have with your parents about morals is because you violate something you knew you weren't supposed to internally. I touched that thing. I wasn't supposed to touch it. I know I'm not. This is pointing to like just human experience. Ontological argument. This attempts to prove God's existence through what's called deductive reasoning and the concept of God as the greatest conceivable being. So it's also arguing that like the human mind is powerful and can imagine things. And so the greatest thing that we can imagine, this must be proof that God exists, that there's a God, because we can conceive of that, this greatest conceivable being. We see in Scripture, though, that God is greater than we can conceive. But we can at least get a basis of like, okay, there must be someone bigger and greater than all of this. Just like a parent can identify, or kid, like more so. They recognize, okay, I'm small, my parents are big. There must be someone bigger than them and someone bigger. We can kind of think about that. Then the moral argument. It posits that God is necessary to explain the existence of objective moral values and duties. Most time people will combat this by trying to tell you that, well, morals are really subjective to you, your household, your culture, where you were raised. However, the core tenets of even the morality of, let's say, the 10 Commandments, they apply to every culture, every way of life for all time. Earliest records that we have of any sort of civilization, there's certain things that were always wrong, certain things that were always immoral. How they handle them is different, right? In a certain culture, you cheat on your spouse, you get hung, right? In another culture, you're celebrated low-key, but they just hit you on the hands. They don't do that again. But everyone knows that it's wrong, so there must be an objective moral lawgiver. Without God, morality would be subjective, and there would be no basis for judging actions as inherently good or bad. And this is important because if you look at society, we look at even social media, we look at our interactions. Anytime we're wronged, even the most selfish person, anytime we're wrong, what do you want? You want justice. That was wrong what you did. But if we have no morals and we have no moral standard and no moral lawgiver, then who are you to say that this is wrong? On what basis? And most times people who are really struggling and don't want to believe in God, they'll just try to push it to say, hey, we just know, it just is what it is. But for me, someone who cares about my intellect, I feel like that's stopping short. Well, it just is what it is. And it's just always how it's been. Okay. Because without that, think about what society would be. You can't tell me I'm wrong for killing anybody. You may be sad about it, but who are you to tell me that is wrong? I shouldn't serve jail time. For what? Then the biological argument. Once again, it's pointing back similar to the other argument around the complexity and apparent design of all these living organisms. Intelligent designer, God. Life cannot arise spontaneously from non-life. We need life to come from a source. historical argument. This one attempts to establish God's existence by examining historical facts, thinking about patterns, history, this invisible hand of God guiding civilizations, history, different things like that, right? It's just based on observation and history. So it may not be one that you lead with or lean into, but I think as we get deeper into our own faith, we can see in your own life, in your own fortification, that, wow, look at God's hand in the larger story of humanity, the larger story of what he's doing. And this one of my favorites, the Christological argument. It starts with Jesus, because Jesus affirmed not only the existence of God, but the plan, purpose, the manifestation of God in the flesh. He affirmed everything before him. He was confirming everything after. So if you start with him, his idea, particularly what we've been celebrating and thinking about in this season, the resurrection. So if Jesus' claims are real, they're true, and he resurrected, then God exists because he affirmed that God exists. So we either take everything that Jesus said or none of what he said. But if he was right, then we take all of it. And it also is the best explanation for the dramatic change in the lives and beliefs of his followers. When we study the person and the work of Jesus later in this series, we're really going to focus on the radical change that happened with those closest to him, his disciples, his followers. They changed radically. Their lives were forever changed because of this resurrection. It was traumatic. People like Paul, dramatic change in posture and lifestyle. And lastly, the bibliological argument. It uses the Bible itself. So we've been talking about the Bible, we've been talking about the scriptures. This is evidence in divine authority. So because the Bible's internally coherent, it's self-authenticating internally, and these supernatural events that are recorded in here provide sufficient grounds to believe in the God who inspired it. This one is especially important when you look at the history of oppressed groups throughout history. Their faith was based on their reading and their understanding and their experience with the scriptures themselves, coupled with these supernatural experiences, dreams, visions, and so on and so forth. But it tells me that these other arguments are very helpful and important, but you can also come to belief in God simply by engaging with the scriptures. So that is enough for your faith. And I want to affirm that because you don't need to know all these other things. You don't need to be a scientific scholar. You don't have to have a degree in philosophy. Just know the Bible and know Jesus. And then congruity. It suggests that the existence of God provides the best explanation for various observed facts and phenomena. It posits that if God exists, it offers a more coherent and satisfying explanation. I don't know about you. The view of God, especially the God of the Bible, it's more coherent to me than any other explanation. And also it's very satisfactory. And I don't want us to overlook that. It's good to be satisfied. Like, okay, this satisfies the qualification. This satisfies what I'm looking for. Like, this makes the most sense. And this satisfies all the check boxes and the blanks. It's really beautiful. So with this, I want to give you a quote from A.W. Tozer, and we're going to have some discussion. What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. And I want to give you an image. So if you're watching this back or you're here now, I want you to close your eyes. Okay? Close your eyes for a moment. And when he says what comes into our minds, it's not what comes externally, but what comes from your heart that races up to your head. And I want you to take a moment to think about God. Think about God. What comes into your mind when you think about God? This is the most important thing about you. It is the basis for how you behave. It's the basis for what you believe about yourself, about humanity, about everything is centered on what you think about God. It's the most important thing about you. What you think about Him. And so as we close out this segment, I want you to take 2 minutes and write down what you thought about. You can put it in your phone, or you can continue to do it mentally. You can put some things in the chat if you're on Zoom. But I want you to take a moment in your journals, wherever you have, and just write down what are some things that came into your mind when you thought about God. And as a reminder, don't forget to continue to support the work that we're doing here to spread the truth of the Christian faith. Subscribe to the channel. We have a lot of great content up there, and we're going to continue. And in our next session, we're going to start to talk about the nature and the attributes of God in a way that I believe will be refreshing, will be fresh, will be dynamic for our hearts and our souls to experience God on a deeper level, because this is the main aim of all this. This is what it's all about, experiencing and knowing God. So with that, we're going to transition into our next section. Thank you.